Hi, I'm Sherry Falco, and I'm here today with Layla Kiley, my co host. And our guest today is Noah Repman. And Noah has an amazing story of how he was delivered from always feeling worthless and never quite enough. So he calls it being delivered from himself. So, welcome, Noah.
Hey there. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I know. I can't wait to hear your testimony. This is going to be great.
Yeah.
Well, you told me when we were talking that you grew up in the church. So you've actually been in the church your whole life.
Yeah, I have been. So I grew up going to church, going to Sunday school, doing all the church things, the picnics, the vacation Bible school, all this stuff. Uh, and that's kind of the backdrop for this story that I'm going to share.
So, but you're in church, but not everything is perfect. You had a very, well, not a correct idea who God was, number one, right?
Yeah, I had a really poor idea of who God was. I thought he was this far off, distant man in the sky, ready to strike me down for any mistake that I had or any sort of wrong idea that I had. Anything less than perfection wasn't good enough for God, in my opinion. And I lived in this constant fear that even though I believed, even though that I did all the right things, I lived in this just constant issue of trying to perform to be good enough for God and be good enough for family or friends or whoever. And that's the beginning of my story. If you want me to just jump in from there.
Sure, just go ahead and you, because you were telling me you were involved in all sorts of activities and things, very busy,
Yeah,
trying to please God, family, and self, I guess. So, why don't you go ahead and start telling us what happened?
yeah, definitely. So I was a very active kid growing up. I was part of all sorts of things, any category you can think of, from music and arts to sports to academic groups. And this isn't to pat myself on the back, but I was successful in almost all of them. Uh, and when it came to sports, I would go to championship events and scouts. I was high achieving and all this stuff. And I say that because no matter how much I succeeded and how much I achieved, it never was good enough. And it kept getting worse and worse and worse, even though I kept getting higher achieving, higher achieving. Uh, the issue that I was facing in my life of feeling good enough and feeling worthy enough uh, never was satisfied. And it kept getting to a point where I would put that on other people and think, oh, I'm not good enough for this person too. I'm not good enough for my family. I'm not good enough for my friends or for my teachers. And it was really dark and really bad.
So, what
I
would you say your view of yourself was? I mean, if you had to put it in words, what would you say that it was at this point?
I would I viewed myself as honestly just another person. Um, I almost saw myself as like outside of myself.
Mm.
It's kind of hard to explain, um, but I never really cared for me as a person, if
Oh,
that makes sense.
yeah.
Um, I
This is
saw
so
other
interesting too,
people.
because this is really common among high achievers. Is they just don't think that they're good enough. I mean, I think that's a really common thing, and it's kind of surprising because of how well they're doing and how well. I think maybe it's because of how easily it's happening, And it's okay, but I can't be good enough. Things maybe have to be harder than this, than what they really are. I don't know what it is, but it's very common among people who are extremely gifted and talented.
And you were telling me you thought this was normal, right? That everyone experienced this, right?
Yeah, I thought that everyone was experiencing this thoughts of either not being good enough or just I need to go further, I need to go further, I need to do more, do more. Um, And what I thought was normal was the experience that I was going through. What many people would call it anxiety or depression or whatever, because as I moved forward in all these events that I was doing and it wasn't satisfying and it wasn't good enough, um, there was this spiral, and I had no clue that what I was going through um, wasn't common, that it wasn't normal, that it wasn't part of everyday life. And that actually compounded on the feelings that I was having, because I was like, oh, I can't deal with this when everyone else deals with this too.
But then you said, so you're literally on this downward spiral. You were telling me when we were speaking, and it's really escalating. And even little things you were telling me were just, piling up. And you end up so this depression and everything ends up you're a senior in high school. And then a very minor thing happens. And can you tell people what happens when you get to the tipping point?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, like I said, I was on this downward spiral, and uh, at first it was big things that would trigger episodes of me feeling super depressed. But as time went on, even the little things like getting a 95 on a test instead of 100 would be not good enough, even though it's a good grade. Uh, and losing something in a sport, even coming in second place, it was wrong and it was gross. And even the little things took me to this point. And one day, after one of these tiny little inconveniences happened, I went home and I was okay. This is it. Even though it was such a minor incident, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I actually was ready to end my own life. Um,
Wow.
I decided that I wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough for family or friends or anybody in my life. And that actually, because I'm not good enough, it would be better for everybody else if I was no longer here. So uh, I made the decision to end my own life that day after a tiny inconvenience. And in the moment, I was home alone. I went up to my room and I took a hunting rifle that I had and I put it under my chin. And as I'm ready to pull the trigger, I hear an audible voice in my house say three simple words: "Don't do it." And I thought I was going insane. I thought, okay, now I'm hearing things. I'm not good enough. I can't do all these things, and now I'm insane. And I just start like laughing it off. But it shook me to the point where I put the rifle down, and I couldn't explain what it was. I had no idea um, if I was going insane or if somebody had turned a radio on or if the TV came on or something. But I knew, okay, I gotta move past this.
So this voice is enough and you're 18 at this point, right?
Yeah, I'm 18. It's near the end of high school. I'm getting ready to graduate. I got accepted to a good school for a good program. Things are looking up, and it didn't matter to me. It didn't matter to me.
But so you hear this voice, and then a few months later, you get invited somewhere. Have I got your
Yeah,
story correct?
yeah, absolutely. So it continues on where that moment is in the background, kind of wondering what that was.
Mhm.
But I had a friend who invited me to this youth group at a church. Meanwhile, I'm 18, I'm getting ready to graduate high school. I'm practically an adult at this point, and my friends are like, "Hey, you have to come check out this youth group." And I'm like, "Aren't we a little too old to go to youth group? Uh, aren't you getting ready to go to college just like me?" It's like, "Oh, don't worry about it. There's a bunch of us there. It's a good time to go hang out." I'm like, "Okay, fine. I'll go hang out." And I get to this youth group, and man, it was it was silly. It's the best complicated word I could use. Silly. The youth pastor, he was doing this skit without words. I think he called it a human video, which I had never heard of before that moment, and I haven't heard of it since then. But at the time, he was acting out the things that God had freed him from. He's acting out on this stage, being free from drugs and from other addictions and from perfectionism, something that I had been struggling with. That God was working on this guy, and outwardly in my mind, I'm like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. And I was like, why am I here? My friend said we eat food, hang out, and play games, but here I am watching this full-grown man acting out a skit. And even though outwardly I think it's really dumb, I'm starting to cry. I'm starting to weep, and I'm not an emotional person. I don't know why I'm crying. I don't know what is happening, but internally, something that he was doing spoke to me. Something that was going on. Now I know my spirit was responding to what God was trying to draw me in that moment. But in that time, I wasn't really understanding what was happening. So I decided I keep needing to come back. I need to be here. I need to be around these people because there's something different about this place. There's something different about these people. Even though I'd been going to church my whole life, doing all the church stuff, this was real. There was something about this place.
Now, were your friends recognizing that you were, getting emotional and that this was speaking to you somehow? Did you say anything or?
Not really. I tried to keep everything close. Nobody knew I was depressed and suicidal and all of these.
Yeah.
Just like nobody knew that. Nobody knew the other emotions that I had.
Right.
I had a nickname. They called me Nomo instead of Noah because I showed no emotion
Oh.
at any point in time.
Wow.
So it's kind of like an insult, but it really did describe who I was.
Mm.
And even they had no clue what was happening in my life. So
Okay, so Nomo, right? That's who you were, right? Is now suddenly
Yeah.
crying. And the youth pastor comes up and he prays for you, right?
Yeah, so eventually what happens, they invited me to the summer camp. And again, I had this thought of, okay, this is summer camp. I have already graduated high school. I'm already getting ready to go to college, and you want me to go to this teen camp is what it was called. And I was like, sure, everyone's going. It'll be my last opportunity to hang out with a bunch of my friends before we go a bunch of different places for college. But little did I know that God had a different plan. And the first night there, the pastor that was speaking, he was talking directly to me, is what it felt like. Even though there was hundreds of kids at these camp, every word that he said is what I needed to hear. And at the end of his message, he said, if this spoke to you, I want you to come forward and I want you to let us pray for you. And I believe that God's going to set you free. So I go forward. I find the goofy youth pastor that was doing this skit earlier in the year. And he starts praying for me. And I don't remember anything that he prayed for. Because in this moment, all I can see in my mind's eye, and I'm not making this up, this just comes to me, is myself with a whole bunch of weight, a whole bunch of garbage bags and luggage bags and just stuff around me. And I see myself weakly pushing these things to the foot of the cross where Jesus is. He is up on the cross, smiling at me, beckoning me to give him all of this weight. all of this stuff that I'm carrying around that's not from him. And I I do so. I respond, and I remember in that moment feeling such a like physical weight lifted off of me. And I just collapse. I crumple to the floor and I'm weeping and I'm sobbing. Here I am, no mo, outwardly expressing just the freedom that I experienced in that moment. And at the same time, it hits me, the revelation. And I hear God in my imagination, I hear him say, that time when you were home, that time when you were alone and you didn't know where that voice came from, the thing that stopped you from ending your own life, that was me. And it took
Wow.
me even further into just this thankfulness, this almost, I would say, euphoric moment of being freed and delivered from the self-hatred, the suicidal thoughts, the anxiety, um, and the performance mentality that I had been carrying for so long since I was a kid. God broke that off of me in a moment because of a simple yes, Lord, I don't want this anymore, and I want you. I want you and what you have for my life. Um, and I haven't looked back ever since.
So when we started, okay, so we started, you said that your view of God was he was demanding perfection. He was going to get angry if you didn't deliver up perfection. So here you're having this moment where you're giving everything to Jesus and he's freeing you and you're lighter. So what happened? Did you have any change in what you thought about God or?
Yeah. Yeah. So the God that I thought was out there and the God who I met were two very different experiences. Um, and whoever's listening to this might have an idea of who God is. Um, but my encouragement for anybody is to meet him personally because he is real and he loves us and he wants to know us intimately and personally. Um, and that's what happened for me. I decided to set aside any idea that I had of him and really just experience him for who he is.
Which is a loving, accepting father, right? I mean, I guess that's
Yeah.
what overwhelmed you too, or, you know, took away that thought that you have to please him somehow, is that he just accepts you and that all the love that he has to offer you just totally took over. And there was none of the, I have to please you somehow or do something for you or be better for you or perform for you in any way.
Yeah. He was so gentle.
Oh, that's
So he
Not
good.
was gentle, and how else would you describe it? Did you have a sense of his love while you were having this encounter, or?
Yeah, I did. Um, it's I get it's going on almost 10 years from when that moment happened, and
Yeah.
I can still think back to that and still rest in that love, in that peace of that moment, knowing that I was one way before and totally different after this encounter with him. And it was his love and his gentleness and his peace um, that really took over.
And so that revelation hasn't left you either, you've said. And have you had more encounters, or was that just so pivotal that it shifted your perspective of him and now you just know who he is? And then anytime you think about him and engage with him, that's the impression you have of who he is.
Yeah, I mean, I've encountered him many times since then, but
Good.
nothing like that first time. Um,
Hmm.
there's been some powerful moments, but uh, the story kind of continues after that first encounter. While still being at this camp, the next day, I would go to this morning devotional like everyone else was supposed to, and the pastor that went up to speak, as he started to pray and getting into his message, um, a really weird experience happened. Something that I didn't have an understanding for, but I knew that it was the Lord because it was the same feeling of love, peace, and gentleness. And while the pastor was speaking, it was kind of like it was muffled and superimposed over my vision, over my sight, was the scene that was playing out. And I couldn't explain it to you, but what was happening in this scene was me out in the lake that was right next to the chapel that we were in, getting water baptized. And like I said, I never learned about anything like that in the church I grew up in. It was kind of an uncomfortable experience because I didn't know what it was. So I went to the youth pastor and asked him what this was, and he says, "Well, do you want to get baptized?" And I said, "Well, how could I say no? Yes, yes, I do." And right then and there, in that moment, we went out into the water and I got baptized. And from there, from that moment where I made that commitment that this is what baptism signifies, is that I was dying to myself. I was dying to Nomo. I was dying to the pain and the self-hatred and the death that God had delivered me from already. And coming up out of that water, I was being raised up with Christ as a new creation. And from that position, as like I can't even look back because it's dead. The thing was put to death by Jesus, and even though I've had to live a life walking out that freedom and that peace and the joy of knowing who Jesus is personally, it was put to death. And that baptism moment that he was calling me into really signified that for me.
So I just, because your testimony is so powerful, I'm just wondering if you could speak to and pray for any of, especially young people who just feel worthless, that they're not good enough, and that God is distant and angry and judging them. If you would pray for them, and even ones who maybe God has directed them to this and they're contemplating suicide. I mean, can you please speak to them and pray for them and invite them to accept Jesus?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I pray, I just want to say I know that there is so much hurt out there. There's so much expectation. There's a heaviness and a weight that some of you might be holding on to. And I want to tell you that that's not from God. That's not from an expectation that this loving Father, who I have met personally, has for you. So let me pray for you that you would experience the same freedom, the same joy, and the same peace that God has given me, that he might give that to you as well as you come into a loving relationship with him. So let's pray. Lord, I thank you for the listener of this podcast. I thank you that you love them dearly and that you care for them and that you want to know them on such a deep level, in a way that is so fun, that is so good, and that is not intimidating and fearful. Lord, I pray that you would meet them where they are, that they would experience your peace, your goodness, and that any weight that they are carrying, anything that's been put on them that's not of you, anything that they have put on themselves, whether it's expectation or any sort of burden, Lord, I pray that you would break that. Your word tells us that your yoke is easy and your burden is light. So we know that what you have for us is good. We pray that you would meet them and break these things off of them right now. In your holy and mighty name. Amen.
Okay, so Noah, some of them might not know, right? How do I invite Jesus in? How do I start this relationship? So could you guide them in that, please?
Yeah. My relationship started with an invitation. And it was an invitation from somebody who knew Jesus. So here we are, the three of us. We claim to know the one who has set us free, who has saved us, who has brought us into a relationship with him. So I want to invite you, as the listener, to take a step of faith and say, Lord, I want to know you. And it just takes one simple act of faith to say yes to the Lord and being obedient to his call to come into that relationship. And what comes from there is getting yourself around people who know how to love him, how to be in community with one another and with him. So here's your invitation. And I ask that you say yes and that you invite Jesus into your heart. The Bible tells us that if you confess that Jesus is Lord and that you believe that he has been raised from the dead and that he has been the one to be sacrificed for our sin to set us free, that you will be saved. The Bible also tells us that all who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. So call on him today and say yes and take that step of faith and reach out to a friend, to a pastor, to someone you know who can help you step into this new relationship with Jesus.
Well, thank you so much, Noah, for being here today and for sharing your testimony. And I just know that it blessed a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I'm so glad to be able to share.
Thanks, Noah. So many kids I know, young people especially today, are struggling with suicide and, for a variety of different reasons, but it does seem to be what's plaguing the youth right now. So I know that this is going to touch a lot of young people, speak to them and minister to them and set them free. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I love that part because when we talked, you didn't share the no-mo piece.
But yeah, it just kind of came out.
Yeah, but it
so
was so perfect because that you grew into your real name. You know, you shed that false thing and grew into who you really are.
There you go. Jesus renamed, right?
See?
Right.
We're launching you right out.
It's happening now. You can snap me. I don't even know what that means. I have a Snapchat, but I don't understand the whole snapping people, what that means.
That's crazy.
So thank you so much, Noah. And we'll be cheering you on. Right. So
yeah, you're welcome.
So thank you so much. And we will see you soon.
Yeah. Talk to you soon.
Bye. I just think it's so interesting about, it's not unusual for people to grow up in the church and still have a false view of God. But then, basically he has an encounter with God's grace. I mean, with Jesus himself, but God's grace, right? And what it really does, it's so freeing and actually enters into a real relationship with God, which is what we're all created for.
And it began with an invitation, like he said. Just someone said, do you want to know more? Do you want to hear about Jesus? It was that invitation, and he just accepted. He took a risk, and he accepted it and had that encounter with God. And that's so amazing. So I would just encourage anyone to accept the invitation. You don't know what's going to happen. You may be thinking nothing's going to happen. God's not real. I don't know, but try it and give it a try. Go up and see for yourself and see what happens. But go for the invitation.
Well, especially if Noah was saying that, how he felt worthless. I mean, when I talked to him the first time, he just kept using the word worthless, which is amazing because he was actually, if people looked at him, was extraordinarily successful. But on the inside, right, he needed God. He needed that love and acceptance to know, hey, I'm loved just the way I am. I don't need to perform. He loves me before I get up in the morning. He loves me before I do anything at all. And now you just see this, as you put it, Layla, when we were talking to him, this peace, this rest. He's a guy you want to hang out with because you're like, wow, this guy is so peaceful.
He is. Yeah, he radiates that peace. It's no longer striving, it's been replaced. All that's been cleared out from him. So he's not striving for acceptance. He's not performing, striving to make an impression or to be better and do more. It's no longer on him. He just has the peace and the rest. And that's what it looks like. That's what being delivered from that looks like. You are at rest.
Yeah. Well, I think, a lot of people want to be accepted. I mean, that's what's driving a lot of things we see now is they want to be accepted. They want that rest. But the thing that happened with Noah was God didn't leave him the way he was, right? He has this encounter, he accepts him, but then he completely transforms him from Nomo. I love that, from the no emotion guy that has everything stuffed and together to Noah, right? Where there's this grace and this peace and this rest. And he just becomes who he was created to be. And that's, the acceptance is first, but then there's that transformation that happens.
And he is an outpouring of that, that love now too. He has the emotion to express. He feels safe to be vulnerable, and that's healthy. So some people feel like it's safe to keep all of your emotions bottled in, right? And then that's what I'm supposed to do. And especially as a man too, I guess, and as a male, that he needs to hold things in, not be emotional, not express how he's feeling, not talk about what's going on in his life. And that led him into a dark place. But God set him free of that. So now he knows how to, in a healthy way, express his feelings, right? And probably, I'm sure, be able to talk about what's going on with him
And nobody
emotionally.
knew, right, Layla? Nobody knew. He said nobody knew. Not his friends knew. No one knew. So,
yeah, so that's so sad. And kids do that too. They don't talk to their friends, or they don't talk to, reach out to an adult or reach out to a youth pastor or someone at the church to let them know that, hey, I'm going through some dark times. It's important to do that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think Noah made a very important point is like, so the invitation, right? He made the invitation to accept Jesus, to seek God. And then he said, then after you do that, right, find a fellowship of people who believe. Because we are not created to do this alone, right? We were created to do this in the family of believers. So I just want to reiterate that point that he made.
Yeah, definitely.
So Layla and I just want to thank you guys for listening today. And we hope that Noah blessed you. And we will see you again on the next episode of the Grace Chronicles.